we're setting up fishbowl observations. And even if the content's different, by watching those teams that like really get it, and having somebody watch it with them. Because otherwise what they'll do is they look for kind of weird, things that'll roadblock, well, we can't do this because of this or whatever. So I don't know how you structure that because everybody's meeting in a room.
And that would be hard. We actually kind of flushed that idea out with our leadership team here, and they were like not into that. Like
They didn't like that idea.
Like, why would you want to do that? It'd be like, you have to get us? You're like a gotcha kind of thing? It's like, oh no, it's just to build on the capacity amongst each other, right? To work together and see how other groups function.
So do you guys, we'll let you get started here, but do you guys use, I know you have that observation form to watch your team, so do you use that to give them feedback then? And so I'm guessing that they're hearing they're not necessarily high performing in some areas. So are you targeting like specific next step for them to?
That's kind of where we've come to with the group we met a couple months ago with all the leadership, PLC team leaders, and had basically that conversation like, hey, here's what we're seeing. Like some folks are doing awesome, and some folks aren't, and so. We want to focus on really this common assessment and pushing common assessments with folks, formative and summative. But some of our teams can't even agree on learning targets. So how do you develop common assessments when you can't even agree on a learning target?
Right.
So it's like it took us to take a step back and realize, just like you do in the classroom, where you have to differentiate your approach with your groups.
Right.
And so we're in that same. I've got to push my math folks to like really become data driven and really looking at their data all the time, and then push my like social studies folks to, hey, how about we develop a unit in social studies? That would be great. Just one, right? So,
good differentiation.
Right. So, and that's been, like I said, that's part of the good and the bad, right? I mean, that's some folks they're doing awesome, but then there's everywhere in between.
Yeah.
Right. So.
Yeah.
That's been a really good avenue, though, because we did hear a common consensus of we want to do like these TACA presentations, but maybe we need a little bit more help or modeling with that, which is when we pulled together and pulled.
We
pulled.
Oh no, I'm good.
For sure.
That helps if they're that open.
Right.
Yeah.
So we pulled the world language area, and we put together through some data and then kind of demoed that in that PLC learning team leader group, and it was good. I mean, we got pretty good feedback from that. They felt like, oh, okay, this is what it looks like in my department.
Good.
And so I think it's just more modeling individually because
it really
can look so different.
Yes.
And so it's saying that's okay. Like data can look in a million different formats. It's data. Whatever's going to be helpful in informing your instruction, that's what you're zoning in on. It doesn't have to look like always numbers and percentages and graphs and everything else like it does in math. Always like for my art PLC, like you're talking about this. However you want to track and see how kids are performing. That's different. I mean, it can look differently.
Yeah,
so
good for you. All right, we'll let you guys
Here's the data, that's it. And that's part of our usually we check in and just, that's it. We check in and see how different groups that we went to look like today. So, like for me, I went to science today, and they were meeting as a large group science discussion, and they were talking mostly about biology and sequencing, how they're going to teach their, like where they're going to teach photosynthesis in this curriculum or in the content area. Or is it going to be in biology or ecology or life science, or should it be in all three at different levels? There are the large group talking about that today. Also doing some business stuff, departmental stuff. I talked to them about going to that proficiency-based grading conference. I think I'll have 3 more people out of there to go. I think the biology teachers up to 10. We'll be up to 10 easily. Okay. Yeah, so I need to do that. That's part of our agenda today.
And it's a day. It's not overnight.
It's one day. Yeah, it's one day. So I'll get them. think we get a little bit of a price break with groups 10 or more, so.
Okay.
So then we need to figure out how we're gonna prioritize in our budget, how we're gonna pay for that.
Right.
Because our professional development is,
You
it's
say-
a donut. So we need to look through, we can do that. We don't need to do that right now.
Yeah.
So I went there, science today, that was it.
I checked in with the ELO PLC, and we had all ELL kind of PLCs meeting together, and Maury leading us through some revamping that we're doing with our ELD plan, or ELL plan, I should say, district plan, and just different steps that are being set in with our dual identified kids. So really looking at those individuals and the areas that they have their learning disabilities in, and then having a conversation with the SPED department and exempting them from those domains within the ELPA scores.
So can we
it
exempt
was-
them altogether from the?
Nope. So depending if they're still accessing, if they're still identified ELL, then the conversation is okay. But if their learning disability is going to be what's holding them back from that particular domain, say in writing, reading, speaking, whatever it is, then you can go into ELPA and exempt them from that domain. So looking at 3 different ways so that being one of the changes being made. Another one is just because a student if they're scoring a 5 on their ELPA, we are exiting them from ELD. A 5 does not mean that they are going to be at benchmark. They can be as far as 2 years behind within their content area.
Say that again?
They can be
A
2
5 is an
years.
exit?
5 is an exit,
Right.
but that does not mean that they will have Oaks passing state scores.
So a
they
5
may,
doesn't correlate with Oaks passing score?
right. I mean, they may be within 2 years of meeting or being at benchmark. So the conversation that prompts then is just because they're out of ELD doesn't
The gap.
mean. Right, so how are we addressing that in the classroom, right? So we're needing more supports in there. They're still accessing intervention, reading intervention, writing intervention. It doesn't mean that I have 5s, I'm not reading my writing assessment, I'm not meeting, I've not submitted passing district writing assessment samples, or I've not met the writing benchmark. That doesn't mean I go back to ELD. That means
Right.
I need a different type of intervention. That's the way that's
Right.
worked.
We've been using the state test and local assessments as indicators in terms of determining an exit for a student.
Yeah, as part of that, but there's been some resistance to, or we don't have a common knowledge across the district as far as 5 doesn't mean that they're rock stars in every subject area. It means that they have
They know English.
right,
Yeah.
right. And then the other thing is maybe they're stuck at a 4 for a couple of years, but they're demonstrating growth in, I mean, they grew 10 points on the reading test. They grew 10 points on the math test. So there's a lot of growth happening in other areas that would say, okay, they're ready to exit from an ELD class. So that was just an idea that was starting to be, it's going to be revamped. So we're digesting some of that and providing some feedback before it's.
This is all going into our yellow plan for the district?
Yep.
The LAO plan?
So they covered those areas there.
So I just said this is an extreme example, a kid like Panchito.
You would go in and exempt
What does he
them
do?
from, you could exempt them essentially from all the domains within there. You'd log in, be exempted, and be logged back out. But then something that kind of, I was thinking of when we're doing all that is if we have these kids that we're exiting and they're at a level 5, maybe we need to look at the last couple of years of kids that we exited in level 5s and say, where are they struggling? Because then maybe that's where we need to be supporting them. We need to be offering more professional development within those core areas. I mean, they're bombing out of social studies. Okay. Is that across the board for all my kids in a level 5? Then I need to be, you know,
Well, one of the things
putting in more
we talked about at the beginning of the
resources
year,
within
one of
there.
our like strategies this year was to do the GLAD and SIAP training as a staff. So do you want to talk to Fred about
Yeah.
like a prep team meeting, getting that set up soon? So we can at least get those kind of strategies started with teachers. Because it'll take, I mean, it's not just ELL that's gonna help these kids, right, pass.
Well, that's
It's like
that's
they
the
get,
point.
they learn
is that
English
it's
there,
not-
and then they go out into the core area, and they
Mhm.
still need additional supports with instructional strategies for, because it's still a second language for them, so they're still gonna need vocabulary better.
There's a lot of academic vocabulary they need help accessing.
So I think getting the staff going on a prep team meeting maybe next month.
Which is where you can really tie in. That's where having those clear learning targets and unit I can statements come in handy, because if I can tell you exactly what I need you to know for this unit, then I can really focus on those big ideas and
Right.
provide instruction and different scaffolding.
Right.
Yes,
Okay.
that's where
I'm just taking notes.
Sure. I met with SPED this morning. We were looking at practices of IEP implementation. We also were analyzing and having discussion around translation versus interpretation, and meeting the letter of the law or policy with that, and what is best practice as well, about getting our IEPs translated in time, and also providing interpretation at meetings. Then we also talked about the attendance, staff at IEPs.
So getting the whole IEP document translated to,
With the corrections in time,
who's doing that now?
ELL.
Like Jaime or sure?
But they need a couple days ahead
Yeah,
of time to get
5,
that
I think
prepped
is
and
what
ready
they
to
were
go out in a
saying.
few, yeah.
The ELL IAs need 5 days
Mhm.
of leeway.
Right, and so does providing interpretation. Does that meet, practice? Does that meet the law? Or do we need to have both translation and interpretation? Or can we get, talk to the parents and say, do you need the IEP translated versus interpreted? And so that's a conversation this morning, need to follow up with and try to get some answers to that. We talked a little about the SPED conference coming up on the 25th in April. And then we also looked at the further conversations surrounding what we had with our area reps with attendance at IEPs. And, better communication practices, more verbal discussions versus emails. And just, start the honest conversation. Not a punitive conversation, start an honest, how can we remedy this? So that was SPED, and then we met also with Health and PE, and I caught the tail end of that conversation, but they were basically taking a look back at some of their common goals that they had for student growth goals relative to their mid-year conferences, and looking at the data and grades associated with that. And so that was in health.
What are they looking at in health? Like, what was their goals?
The goals are
Student growth goals for like EULA or larger.
I can't remember the exact
That's
one,
okay,
but it's
sorry.
no, it's all right. They have some writing goals.
They had some vocabulary goals too. I know they
Yeah.
had some common.
Yeah, but it was around writing, if I remember correctly. But basically, they were just discussing at the end where they're at with that relative to the mid-years when I got in there.
As you've been coming around with your mid-year conferences.
Yeah.
Yeah, the mid-year, I think that's one of the mid-year conference check-ins. So as I've been going to those, I found that it'd be really like good conversations, right? Like having goals to look at and review with data, and sitting with folks and talking about what they're teaching and how they're teaching it. It's really cool.
I think it's been a really good way to just refocus and reemphasize those goals, because you create them and you have to have that attached, that piece that where you go back and you look. And so I think that's been the main point when we're meeting, and the realization for staff is saying, yeah, okay, I looked at this, I'm kind of working on this, I'm stretching or modifying this way. Great, that's what we're looking at, right? You're saying, was that a realistic goal? Did it meet? Did it not?
Right.
I mean, how is that changing now? What are you going to do to either meet that or adjust that?
Okay.
Or
The math folks had
That been
just,
pretty-
like the Algebra B teachers had a common goal around a certain unit in their course. And so I'd had met with 3 of the teachers, and they just finished that unit. And the goal was like 90% proficiency on that unit. And 2 of the teachers were like at 82, 84%, and then 1 teacher was like at 50. And I was like, well, have you brought this? Have you brought your data together? They haven't yet brought their data together to look at that, but that's yeah. Like, how come your kids are doing well and your kids are struggling? How are you teaching your kids to learn this? That conversation hasn't happened yet, but that was part of the conversation I had with them. I was like, you guys need to all get together and look at your data together, because what I'm seeing is this is an inconsistency. So that was cool.
PE folks, one of their goals was centered on fitness testing. And it was interesting to take a look at the fitness testing they had in first semester versus the last semester of last year, with some of our kids who would draw in December.
Oh yeah.
You know, they're gone for 2 weeks or 3 weeks or whatnot, and then you know, basically how that impacted their fitness. So the growth, I guess, you know, comparing apples to apples, if you're looking at growth versus the 2 winners, but then the kids are getting older, or looking at the 2 springs, but if you compare them spring and winter, then, you know, it can be skewed because of the time off. And so is that a goal within a goal? You know, analyzing that data.
Right. Sub goal.
Exactly.
That was one of, I mean, a little bit differently, but there was some light bulbs that were going off as far in the science department when they were looking at the Unit 3 assessment as well, in the pre and post. And then it was, well, there was this much growth, but some kids were meeting the growth target and others were not, but that's because they started with more knowledge than other kids, and then highlighting some of the kids that were question marks. And it was like, well, is that an accurate measure of what they really knew? Because it was just, it's not graded, there's no weight on it. So then that conversation came up. Okay, so how do we adjust that? How do we modify that to get more of an authentic take on what they know here? And I know that some of the general physical science classes are really working on then taking their unit common assessment and chunking the questions so that they fall within the learning targets, so that they have a way of saying they consistently scored lower in this group of questions. And so then I know that this target that correlates to that, they're not as strong at. So when they're building on each other, they're working on revamping the way that they lay out their assessments.
So the test will be laid out by learning target versus
mimicking that a little bit more. So we're really working on that and how to make those pre-assessments more authentic. So
And
that
I
the
think
kids
in the
were
math
learning
when they did
page.
that initially, they had them like chunked out by
Yeah.
learning target, but then they went away from that. Each question was identified by learning target. So like at the end of the question, it would say like learning target 1.2 or learning target. Then you can kind of collate that data.
Right.
I don't know why they went back to that though.
I mean, it seems like it would work if so long as you had an identifier to know which category to put it under,
Right.
so that you're highlighting.
But that's the idea, right?
Right. And then the other piece that they were looking at, which was really neat to see, was they were looking at the way that their questions were written and saying, is this measuring what they know, or are they being held up by the vocabulary within the question? I mean, and that's really important for our ELL learners, right? So are they stuck on that academic word? Now, if that's part of the learning target, like this is the essential vocabulary you need, then you're measuring 2 different, is it the vocab or is it this piece of it? Because what they noticed was some of them, when they went back and asked for clarification on the question, they were able to unlock the concept and write that in. So then it was like, let's go back and rework the way that we wrote that down. So.
Right, or how we address vocabulary in class, or how we're learning vocabulary in class. Cool.
Pretty neat.
Yeah, otherwise, I mean, your conferences have been good. I've enjoyed having the conversation.
They're authentic. I like it.
It's cool.
Yeah, and some of them are making great progress, and some of them are still working.
But they're all reflecting, which I think
Absolutely.
is key, which I
Absolutely.
really, it's
Progressive.
not so much you
Yeah.
got it or you didn't get
Right,
this,
exactly.
but they're all
One of the
having
things I've
that
been
dialogue.
Doing with all the folks is taking a look at this document together.
Right.
The 10 domains, right, of the teaching and learning standards. And like for me, what I talked to him about is like, we need to begin to develop a common understanding of this document, right? Because what I think of as making appropriate and timely provisions for individual students is maybe different than what that looks like to you.
Right.
And you, right? So how do we as a staff begin to like develop a common understanding of each of these standards?
There's some guiding,
There's some guidance in there.
right?
But like, I even think further, like next year, right? So however things go in the next couple weeks. Next year, we as a group, as a administrative group and as a school, need to like really hone in and begin to like unpack some of these with the staff and begin developing or growing that shared understanding and focusing on one target or one domain. Like, and I've been looking for like instructional strategies, right? Because like here at school, I feel like and that's what I did with the teachers. Like I feel like we have a really strong, really good at putting structures in place for kids. So if they fail at this level, then we catch them here. And there's these safety net structure pieces. What we don't do is talk about teaching.
Right.
What does that look
Right.
like? What are
So
the
when you close your
effective
door and
strategies?
you start teaching, what are you doing? Right. And so I just think there's so many like awesome teachers here.
And what's similar too within different departments in their different teaching styles
Yeah.
versus, CTE
Yeah.
versus, right, exactly.
So like I think just that one domain can be like a whole year's worth of work. I mean, that's a whole school year of really developing and defining what 8.1 through 8.5.
But we're going to have some pretty good
Like, this is what it
examples
looks
from our
like.
observations.
Yeah.
Yep.
Totally.
And that's where, going back and doing a self-audit or taking a look back at each other's, breaking it down and then make a key almost.
So that's what we were talking about, going through those observation notes and really highlighting where some of these are represented and saying, right here, when you're doing
Yeah.
this, you're doing the I do, we do, you do.
Right, right.
This helps to reinforce that concept, or you're using those exit tickets. those
It's just
different
unpacking them.
comprehension.
Unpacking 8, 1, 2, 3, 4, and so forth.
Well, yeah. So we all know what that looks like and what that means. But then also using that to begin the conversation together about how do you teach this and how do you engage kids and how do you do it? How do you do it? And having that conversation staff wide, I think it'd be pretty cool.
Be interesting to see what it looked like district-wide.
And
That's why.
that's part of
Breaking
we
big
need our
picture.
own inter-rater reliability. Like
Exactly.
we're probably all on different pages of how we would rate people, right?
Right.
So it's not perfect, but as I think about next year and the work that I want to focus on next year, that's a big part of it. Focusing on instruction in the classroom. What are we doing in the classroom? And a lot of that, PLC time is people do that during PLC time, but
Yeah.
it's not explicit. Right? It's not like we're doing it like this is what we're going to focus on at our in-service day, at our staff meetings, we're going to keep coming back to this all the time and talking about this. So
Be a good tool, especially.
if this is these 29 standards are like 5/6 of your evaluation, we should have a really good understanding. All of us should really know what that means. Right? Everybody needs to know what these means, not just me and you and you.
Exactly.
Right. So
Cool.
what else?
Mid-year conference check-in, completing those this week.
On the conference, the proficiency-based grading conference,
Yeah.
I've got 4 math teachers that want to go and 3 world language folks, and I think 3 science teachers. The biology folks are want to go.
Okay.
At least so far. So I'll get them going today.
And are they set for, you said one day?
One day,
Just one.
just Friday. Yeah.
One of the, okay.
Are you going to go to that combo?
That'd be good if you went, maybe or Kyle.
I can.
I think we might have an interview that day though. I'm gonna do an interview.
Oh, you both be here. Yeah, I can go.
So algebra AB tracking. This is a conversation that happened in some of my mid-year conferences with Shayla and Jacqueline, is they want to look at how kids who went through the Algebra A, B sequence are performing in Geometry and Algebra 2. So Deb's pulling some data on all the kids who have had Algebra A and B, like passed those classes, and then went into Geometry.
As compared to-
compared to like not just straight algebra.
And just trying to see how kids are performing
Right.
relative to the kids who didn't go through Algebra A, B.
Right.
Because he started in the algebra.
Yeah, and I think that, like, what they're thinking or their hypothesis is that there's so much hand-holding that happens in the AB level that when they get to Geometry and Algebra 2, that kind of goes away. And so when you're used to that level of attention or focused support,
Right.
then all of a sudden it's gone. They're feeling like those kids are struggling, so they just want to pull that data and look at it and see if that's actually happening or not. I don't have that data yet.
Interesting. Cool.
Yeah. Learning team leaders, is there anything on the agenda?
Learning teams. Let's see.
Do we want to do another check-in as far as how that data is going with after getting together that mid-year conference and see if they've been able to pull together any TACA information? I know that some
groups.
departments were, some departments were requesting more information from Deb and seeing how to pull their gradebook information into Excel and then have a common dumping ground so they could kind of examine that. So
Okay.
do we have an area that we want to maybe use as a focus to model one of those again? We could focus on one aspect of it and then do like another mini.
Us present another topic to the group?
Or take a group and walk them through and have them
Uh-huh.
do it within the group. Just be another way to look at it.
Yeah. Having follow-up with the TACA, maybe in our PLCs individually, each of us working with them.
Yeah. Yeah, I don't know right now, like I feel like individually, right? Like I met with social studies today after their PLC and it sounded like it didn't go very well. So like I met with Dave earlier and had this good talk about like Common Core and working to do this informational texts and reading within social studies and this whole list of books and agree upon what they're going to read and this great plan that just was like missiled out of the sky. It sounded like by some of the people in there. So I'll probably want to recheck in with him. And so I mean that's it, right? Like I feel like with that group, there's nothing short of just saying, look, the expectation is, and you'll have this done by.
That's some of the feedback I got from
Right,
just
like,
a couple people in
just
the
do it.
science.
Right.
Yeah. Like, do we have this as an expectation? Can you help
Right.
say that?
Right.
Because it's hard to do that as a leader with my peers.
I think having the vision for where we want to go for some of these folks too, and I feel like too sometimes there's a feeling of trying to complete the process when the process is ever evolving. It's always in motion. You're always analyzing or changing practice or whatnot. And I think for some folks, they're struggling with that in a sense. And how to collect information and take a look at it and break it down, synthesize it versus, just finishing something. And no matter how many times we talk about that message, I think there's still a gap there. And it's causing frustration.
Yeah.
But does that frustration allow to break down the goal or group? Absolutely not.
But it does.
It does.
But it derails the whole process for those guys. So then I met with Keller, came in, and I was like, why can't you guys just agree upon what you want to teach? And global studies, we're going to teach A, B, and C. And I'm a really good history buff, that's my specialty, and you're a good geography specialist, so you develop this geography unit, and we'll develop the history unit, and then we can swap them, and then now we've got 2 units done, right? And then assessments, and